Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Renée Westlake. Was there a moment that, you actually had to fight for that?
That meeting boosted my self-esteem.
Welcome back to the LoopLynks podcast, where we share stories of people shaping not just industries, but lives and entire communities. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Dr. Renée Westlake. For over 40 years, Renée has been a teacher, a mentor, and an advocate for the arts. She's written innovative curricula, guided countless educators across the nation, and led programs like the National Association for Music Education. Her work has helped students discover leadership, not just in music and arts, but in all areas of her life. From creating drumming courses that gave middle schoolers a safe place to mentoring tribal leaders in Montana and cutting dropout rates nearly in half, Renée's journey shows the incredible ripple effect just one educator can have. What should schools be instilling in children or trying to develop in students that create better leaders tomorrow?
What a great question.
Renée, it's such a privilege to have you here on the show. Welcome to the LoopLynks podcast.
Thank you, Joel. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. Well, Renée, before we dive into the decades of your work, I just wanted to rewind a little. Teaching and leading usually start long before the classroom, and I learned that you mentioned your family, your mom and your two dads, and the sixth grade teacher who really noticed something different in you, not just your music or math skills, but the way of seeing complexity that you had. What was it in the sixth grade that, it was the teacher who looked at you and said, you're capable of a whole lot more than you think?
Well, Mr. Pennings was in Portland, Oregon, and he had called my parents and asked for a conference with them. And he wanted to let them know that I had very complex thinking in mathematics. And also that transferred to musical rhythms as well as composition, storytelling, and writing. And that meeting boosted my self-esteem in a family that was basically uneducated. And the meeting lit a fire under my mom and both of my dads to further their own education. Mom took night classes in typing and writing. My biological dad went to college and eventually became a lawyer. And my adoptive father went to college to obtain a business degree. It was magic to me to realize what a positive influence a teacher could be on my entire family.
Well, that's really something, Renée. Most of us don't think of a child's learning as something that can actually influence adults. And yet, in your story, it did. And you saw education change your family even before you became a teacher. But that, I'm sure, there came a big choice, music or math. So, and you chose music. So my question is, why did you choose music? What made you feel that it's much more than a subject, more like a calling?
Well, I think a couple of things, Joel. The first thing is that I did a pre-student teaching in mathematics, and I loved it. And I thought that's probably where I was going. But then when I student taught, I ended up student teaching in high school band. And I fell in love with it. And I felt like what you can do with children through music goes beyond just organization and learning and memorizing, but it brings in the creative aspect of learning. And I felt like students had more choices when I would talk about sound and rhythm. They had the choice of how they did things with their tongue and things like that. And anyway, so I just decided to do that because I felt like it really sparks the achievement of students. And if they're achieving highly in music, that goes into other areas. Some of my finest students that I had are now doctors and attorneys and college professors and just doing great things. And of course, I have some that are professional musicians, but in general, it just sparked the creativity of students and took their achievement and intelligence to the next level.
Great. Well, just brings me to a question that just popped in my mind. That do you feel that in your own personal life, you may have felt being drawn to music way before adulthood, maybe in your childhood? Did you have a thing for music even as a child, which maybe that teacher also may have identified?
Maybe. I think that's very possible, Joel. My mom loved to sing. We always sang in the car. And my parents, all three of them, and of course, I lived with my mom and my adoptive dad, but I had contact with my biological dad. They all encouraged me when I wanted to play an instrument. They just encouraged me. And so I think that is kind of where I found my earliest love for music is in a family that values the arts.
Great, great. So, right from the start, I feel your story wasn't really about just learning certain educational content. In fact, it was more about seeing, identifying, and about what people are capable of. Like, for instance, back then in your childhood, your parents, your classmates, and eventually your students. So, your purpose in life has always been about transforming people, identifying their strengths, and helping them building on that. Would that accurately summarize what your life has been like?
That would just, you just pinpointed it.
Oh, thank you. Well, one thing that really stands out in your story that, teaching isn't just about classroom lessons or even standing in front of a class in a classroom. It's about seeing kids or children who may otherwise go unnoticed, the wallflowers or the underdogs, if you may call them. You mentioned that you learned their names first, the quiet ones, the timid ones. So, what was it like early on in your career, realizing that teaching was basically about drawing the hidden potential in these students who otherwise are not noticed by other regular teachers?
I'm glad you brought that up. It was a necessity when I started teaching. A music teacher very often, instead of having 5 classes a day of 30 kids, they might have 5 classes a day of 80 kids, a choir of 80, a band of 80. And so I had larger classes. And then I would see other schools and other children the next day instead of the same kids. And so I had a ton of names to learn. And so I was trying to figure out ways to remember their names. And so I started with what I call the wallflowers, those kids who are neither obviously extraordinarily gifted, but they're not struggling either. They're just the kids whose names you don't usually learn first. So those were the kids I tried to be able to say their name. And once these kids knew that I noticed them, they tried harder and they appreciated being noticed. And a few years later, I worked to find gifts in every single child, especially early teenagers who had lost their sense of wonder for learning. I had those kids demonstrate things using their own gifts. And sometimes those gifts were hard to find. And I took mental notes from teachers, Joel, whose classes were extraordinary, whose classes were enthusiastic and creative and full of exploration. And then when I moved into an arts administrator position, I began the process of mentoring young teachers in a sense of excellence in their field of music or art or dance or theater. Does that answer your question?
Yes, ma'am. And I can completely relate to that because from personal experience, that's the very fact that my teacher even knows my name in a whole class of, say, about 80 students. Well, that would have certainly shot up my confidence, definitely. Just, the fact that I am being identified as a human being in a lot of top players or high performing students. So that definitely is a given. Well, that's very impressive and purposeful, Renee. It sounds like you were building confidence in children even before they actually knew that they had it. And, this question just comes to mind that teaching isn't always smooth. And you've been very vocal about your energy and you've been very open about it. And maybe that did not really fit in with a lot of the regular educational norms. So, how do you stay true to yourself, while connecting with colleagues and even with students, maybe who are not matching that kind of passion and that kind of energy for education or music per se?
Well, I think I'm going to start, Joel, by telling you that as a teacher, I had three big challenges that I had to deal with myself before I
Mhm.
could work with students with challenges. Challenge number one, I am loud. I'm one of those people that I talk loud, I move loud, I'm a big personality. And sometimes that offends people. Some people like it. But teachers and parents and students who were more subdued found me difficult. And I could see that. And I asked to work with my own supervisors to help me to create a middle ground for my outgoing personality so that I could have impact on all types of students without overwhelming or intimidating others. My second challenge is that I grew up just hating gossip. And a teacher's lounge is a den of gossip about their spouses, their bosses, their naughty students, their community issues. And I wanted to stay away from the teacher's lounge, but that made me look like I was stuck up or thought I was better. So I learned to go in often enough that they
Mhm.
knew I was friendly and not so often that I was, you know, brought into the gossip. And my third challenge that I worked on my entire 40-year career, and I still work on with administrators in my retirement from mainstream education and in my current work as a mentor and consultant, music and all of the arts have to continuously fight their way to being respected as an important subject. And I've always known how important the arts are to culture, to history, to teamwork, community engagement, and the structure of learning and assessment. But I often found myself seemingly treated as a second class citizen in the hierarchy of subjects of importance in school. So I learned,
Okay.
so I learned the research on music and arts education, and I embedded that knowledge into the concerts that I was directing, the presentations, the displays, the clinics that I taught. And it eventually made a difference in the teachers and administrators who did not value the arts. And so I started there, and that helped me to work with the students who were not as as readily confident or who felt like they didn't fit in.
Okay. Well, there's just a question that came to mind. Life has a way of throwing curveballs. And there's a phase, Renee, in everyone's life, even, however strong their calling, and however passionate they may be towards that calling, but there is a phase when you feel burnt out. Like it could be a certain incident. Do you have any anecdote to share with us where you wanted to just throw up your hands in the air and say, "Hey, this is it. I'm done here," or you started reevaluating, "Am I even on the right path?" and all that. Did you feel burnt out at any stage in your life?
I don't think I've ever felt burnt out, Joel, but I have experienced the frustration and of trying to work with people who didn't value what I
Mhm.
felt was so valuable. And it didn't burn me out, but it did ignite a passion. And I had to be careful that it didn't ignite an anger in me. So I had to work really hard on that. Um, I I just feel like we we have to make sure that we balance our lives in a healthy way so that we don't burn out. I hear the term burnout a lot. And I think that a lot of people feel like they're burned out when in fact they might be bored. They might be, they might just need to make some changes in their own teaching or in their own personal lives. And we have to make sure that our personal lives balance with our professional life. Did that even start to answer your question?
Yes, it did. As a matter of fact, a great work-life balance can, to a very large extent, I feel, reignite passion towards what you are already passionate about. Apart from that, anything else that you did to, deal with those episodes of frustration where you feel that, they're not even understanding how important this is to holistic education for my children, and anything that you used to do, on personal front, maybe take a vacation or, take up cycling for a while. Some people do that. Anything of that sort?
Well, I think that as a woman and as a mother, I have to be careful of my own health in that I think it's easier for women to gain weight and
Hmm.
to not take the time for themselves to exercise and to eat well. For many years, I was a person that had to grab some food between my work day and the concert that I was directing that evening. And so I had to be intentional about eating more healthy. And so I think that that was a part of my frustration. And I don't know. I tend to be a bit of a Pollyanna, and sometimes maybe I'm just fooling myself. Maybe I've just talked myself into the fact that things aren't so bad. But I know even in my marriage, sometimes my husband will say, "I can see it in your face. You're frustrated. Can we just talk about it?" And, he's been such a good work balance for me because he can see. Also have one of my children who can see that I'm frustrated before I see that I'm frustrated.
Okay. And just being heard out, I think it goes a long way in addressing that certain feeling, that certain emotion that you are feeling, and even better when it's being addressed way before you actually start feeling it, and getting overwhelmed by it. Great, great.
Well,
And you mentioned something. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just you sparked something in me, and I was just
Okay.
thinking that one of the things that I wanna tell you, Joel, is that and to any audience who is listening, is sometimes as a mentor, and a teacher, of course, is a mentor, we we look at the frustrations that we see in children, and we
Mhm.
think, "How does that apply to my life?" And do you have time for me to tell you a little story about a wonderful young man?
By all means.
Kevin? Okay. So this happened when I was in my 20s. And so I was a very young teacher. And Kevin was a bitter fourth grader. It's hard to imagine a kid who's 9 years old who is already bitter about life. But it was, he, he valued different things. He had, um, he had a family situation that was abusive, and he was neglected, and
Mhm.
he was often violent, and he misbehaved on the playground. And I had connected with him in my band class, and I handed him a drum. Why I handed a kid who misbehaves a drum, I'll never know. But he loved it. And he ended up in his middle school years getting arrested for stealing tires. And he was sent to a youth facility that seemed kind of like a jail for teenagers. And my husband and I traveled the 200 miles to this youth facility, and we took him a jazz drum set with the permission of the facility leadership. And Kevin started a rock band in the facility. And when he was released, his band continued to play. And they weren't great, but they had fun and they had a following. And the leadership that Kevin took on creating that rock band was the beginning of healing his bitterness. And it was the beginning of my realizing that every child can be a leader and every adult can be a leader. They're just not all loud like I am. Sometimes they're understated. Sometimes they choose different ways of leading. Anyway, fast forward to now, he created a good relationship with a woman who ended up being his wife. He parented his children and encouraged them to be active in the arts, in music. And he's in his 50s now, and we have lunch occasionally. He's a good citizen, a good person, a productive member of society. And that was when I began to believe that we can all be a leader. Um, any type of leadership practice balances and improves a student's life. So maybe that is a backdoor answer to your question of burning out, is that we have to keep finding that new way to invent ourselves. And as an older person, I'm still trying to reinvent myself.
Exactly. You have answered that question with that anecdote. And I'm just thinking about the others who were in his band who were at the facility. I mean, you were able to impact their lives as well, and I'm sure that changed a lot of things for them as well. Now, I just wanted to touch, lightly upon something that we talked about a while back about music finding its place in education, which is not often regarded as an essential, maybe as a co-curricular thing. So, was there a moment that you actually had to fight for that, and you had to have people understand how important this part of the entire curricula or education system is important, and music has its place in the overall development of the minds of children if they have a flair for it, maybe.
Well, there wasn't a defining moment, but there have been many defining moments, Joel. There have been things that continue to reinforce in me the importance of the arts. One example is that I have two daughters, and they are 6.5 years apart. They both ended up being professional dancers in Los Angeles. And that creative trip for them, that journey, helped them to understand people better. And they were raised in this small farming town that I live in, and they went to the big city, and the arts got them through that transition. And there have been other moments that have really helped me to understand the value of the arts. I mean, right now I have a chamber music group that I'm the board president of. And this group travels all over Montana, which is massive. Montana is one of the largest landmass states in the United States, but it also has the smallest population. We have the same population as Rhode Island, which is teeny tiny. In fact, it is true we have more cows than people in Montana. And the chamber music that this organization that I help lead goes into tiny little towns that have a school with a graduating class of 3. And I mean,
Okay.
these are tiny little one-room schoolhouses that have kindergarten through 12th graders in the same school, and they all work together and they mentor each other. We take these professional musicians to these little towns and we play in people's living rooms, we play in their churches, we play in their schools. And I have seen the impact of great music on instilling lifetime dreams of kids and even older adults that want to take the next step in their own life to do something even more meaningful than what they're doing now. So I think the culture of what music and art and theater and dance does for humankind is super important. So, no, I didn't have one defining moment, but yes, I've had many defining moments.
Great, great. Yes, I completely agree. I couldn't agree more that music and the performing arts should be part of education, any institution. And then we have that certain a part of your life when you were dealing, matter of fact, working with the tribal leaders of Montana, and you were combining research and a cultural understanding, and you were cutting out the dropout rates by over 50%. So, how did you and what did you discover about this connection between culture and leadership and education as such?
What a great question. Well, I was lucky enough when I was working on my doctorate to have 2 tribal leaders in Montana. We have a number of federally recognized indigenous tribal reservations in Montana. And 2 of the leaders of different tribal reservations were in my doctoral cohort. And when I started to do my research on the impact of mentoring leadership and student achievement, these tribal leaders started to discuss with me the possibility of taking my research and making it culturally appropriate for middle school and high school students and maybe trying to impact the dropout rate. Now, when I talk about a dropout rate, I'm not talking about the entire state, but I'm talking about some of the areas of our state that have some of the most severe dropout rates. And of those severe dropout rates, a lot of them are indigenous students from the tribal reservations. And so when I finished my doctorate, I worked with these 2 tribal leaders and blended my research with their cultural traditions without my actually working with students. Because as an older white woman, um, a lot of students wouldn't listen to me. But my research was utilized with their traditions, with their leaders to mentor every single high school indigenous student as a leader. And 3 years later, the dropout rate in one of the schools had fallen to half. of the dropout percentage from 3 years prior. So they enhanced the leadership program to include middle school students, 11, 12, and 13-year-olds. And this school and the tribal leaders have continued to meet with me to brainstorm my leadership program and their cultural adaptations of the program. So, I've targeted certain areas of the state where I'm welcome. And then when I'm welcome there, then I'll hear from another tribal leader that says, would you try it in our area of the state? So I'll travel there and work with them.
Well, isn't that wonderful? Great, great. And, something just strikes me. Absolutely, I'm sure. And, it just comes to mind that in both these stories that I'm seeing, both Kevin and Montana students, one thing that's common that you're identifying people and making them believe and understand that every student at some point, in some way, can lead. So how would you define leadership in education today, Renee? I mean, beyond pursuing just titles and hardcore success, what should schools be instilling in children or trying to develop in students that create better leaders tomorrow?
Great question. First we have to help teachers to match leadership standards to their curriculum standards. And we have national standards for education, we have state standards for education, and we have school district standards that depend on the school board of each town or area. And if they can take the leadership standards and tie them to the subject standards, that makes a huge difference. And it can be math, it can be reading, science, physical education, the arts, or something else. And then we need to give them simple tools for finding kids who are, like you and I, Joel, charismatic. And then we need to give them simple tools to find kids who are quiet examples, and kids who show integrity, and kids who lead by serving others, and then kids who lead with perseverance, who just stick to something. And most kids, and you, Joel, and me, we have at least two of those traits. And so together, we develop a training program for each type of leader, a training program for quiet examples, a training program for charismatic leaders, a training program for people with high integrity, and for kids who exhibit perseverance, and kids who serve. And it doesn't matter if a student begins to show a different type of leadership throughout the training. They're all being trained to be leaders. And
Right.
that training in itself enhances student achievement and success. So I think that's the way. And so you use curriculum and standards to teach students, remembering that the student is more important than the curriculum. And you just give each student the confidence to succeed. I hope I didn't go off on a tangent, but did I?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I feel eventually, and correct me if I'm wrong, eventually when you produce such leaders, they end up having a blend of all those virtues of integrity, of, perseverance and everything together. And that could really blend into create a very powerful leader who can actually empathize with those who may have certain weaknesses and make them rise alongside. Renee, you've been teaching for 40 years now, and even after all these years, you're still mentoring, guiding other educators, and completely shaping frameworks and curricula that are actually reaching far beyond the classroom. So I have to ask, what does legacy mean to you? what's the thread that actually connects everything that you've done so far in your life?
Oh, wow. What a loaded question. I actually love that question. Um, I think that legacy to me just means, have I made a difference in one person's life who can make a difference in someone else's life? And I think that is the legacy that we leave. And, I look at global leaders and I think it would be wonderful to have an impact on so many. And yet, I think we can have an impact on many just by having an impact on one. So, as simple as that sounds, that to me feels like the legacy that I want to leave. If I had an impact on my husband, on my children, on my grandchildren, on my students, and when I look at my students, they're anywhere between 30 something and 50 something now. And if I've had an impact on my colleagues, or when I was supervising teachers, if I had an impact on at least one of them. And I don't know, Joel, if I've told you that I work for our local university and I take one student teacher a semester, and I'm their university supervisor. I work with them and mentor them when they're having their student teaching in a music classroom. And so I'm still doing
Okay.
that. So I think to me, legacy is, did I have an impact in a way that they can have an impact? And, that translates to many.
Exactly. That's kind of a ongoing ripple effect that you've created, and the very fact, I think in your case, and a lot of people, the greatest satisfaction that they can possibly at the end of their career is that they were able to transform lives, and I don't think it gets bigger than that.
I
Would you
think you're
agree?
right. I do. I totally agree with you.
Right. Well, and legacy, as we're talking about it, it isn't invisible. It actually shows in the people that you've helped. Recognition matters so much to people these days, and I just feel that it's important. It's very important to be able to recognize people who are maybe not performing as well as the others in terms of pure numbers, but then eventually they are putting in their all. They're putting in their sweat and blood into certain things, and maybe they're not cut out for it or something. It's important to, I feel, correct, to recognize those people, and but why do you feel that, it's imperative and foundational to honor students who are themselves stepping into leadership roles, and teachers that have actually already given decades of their lives to their work, to their passion? Why do you feel that it's important to recognize those people?
Well, I think that I'm going to turn it on you because,
Okay.
I have only met you briefly, and yet I would recognize you in a heartbeat for having the aptitude um, to take a conversation and make it something that can help people's lives. And
Thank you
so,
for that.
well, of course, and not meant to be a compliment, but that recognition, just the fact that you have been recognized for what you do well, it makes you want to do better. And I think of the people that I have met through your organization that do things well, and some of your team are very quiet and understated, and some of them, are more aggressive. And there are so many things that we would recognize in those people. And I know when I was recognized early as a leader, it made me want to be a better leader, because I think that you and I both know, as charismatic and outgoing leaders, that our prisons are full of charismatic and outgoing leaders. They We can be a negative leader or a positive leader. And so I think by recognizing leadership ability and recognizing what people do well causes them to do it well in a better way, in a more nurturing way, in a way that helps the world to be a better, kinder, uh, whatever it is that we're doing to try to make our world a better place. I think that's
Absolutely. Absolutely. I completely agree. It just brings to mind that certain quote from the Spider-Man 1 movie where, uh, his uncle tells him that with great power comes great responsibility. Now that you know that you have a certain virtue, you want to do it better and in a way that actually impacts people positively and makes them rise in their certain role. I couldn't agree more. Absolutely. So, since you're mentoring other educators today, Renee, you're basically helping them bridge, theory and practice. So, if you had to leave every school district with one piece of advice for creating more human-centered education, what would that advice be?
well, I think the advice would be to learn to be a three-legged stool. And that three-legged stool can't stand if one of the legs is missing. And number one, you have to be competent. You have to know your subject, your whatever you're leading. You have to know that. You have to know the research. You have to know, what has been done before, the history. You have to know the culture. And the second thing you have to have is you have to have organization. You have to figure out how to structure that content that you're an expert in. And finally, you have to have interpersonal skills. And that doesn't just mean being a good talker, it means being a good listener and asking direct questions. So I think if I had to give advice to someone, it's learn to be a three-legged stool and realize that those three legs are equally important. Don't ever get puffed up with one of those and make them more important than the others, because we have lots of people in this world who are organized but aren't making a difference. And we have lots of people who are friendly, but they're not making as much a difference. And those who are competent in what they're doing, but if they don't have good interpersonal skills or organization, they won't make the difference. So be a three-legged stool. Isn't that silly? But that's what I thought of.
No, that's Renee. That's a fantastic answer. Uh, I haven't heard that before, but that's absolutely outstanding. The answer, and it just I can relate to what you're saying exactly. And thank you so much for that answer here. Well, recognition isn't just about performance. We can sum it up. It's not just about performing in core numbers, shining in your workspace. It's also about creating a presence, not only in the workplace, but in other people's lives. It's about people who don't just rise, but they're also lifting others as they're rising. People who can, whose decisions aren't just measured by just mere metrics and numbers on a computer screen, but by changed behaviors, changed attitudes, and eventually changed outcomes. So that's what we're looking to honor here at LoopLynks, and that's why having someone like you, Renee, who can actually see beyond just the surface, isn't just valuable to us, it's absolutely necessary. So thank you so much for joining us today. And it was absolutely wonderful speaking with you and getting to know about your story your experiences. Thank you so much, and you have a good evening ahead.
You too. And I want to thank you for taking the time and for what LoopLynks does, just to recognize